I am a libertarian. I believe in, say, free markets, private property, these kinds of ideas. And that was what drew me to Bitcoin in the first place. I'm seeing so many blow-ups, whether it was Mt. Gox or Quadriga CX. Every time one of those blow-ups happens, that's when there's a surge of interest in self-custody.
You also started on an exchange. You didn't go straight to a hardware wallet, like on day one. Like almost no one does that.
It's easy to say, oh, I'm staunch, I've got a high risk tolerance. Like it's easy to say that.
Yeah.
But wait until you're tested with an 80% drawdown.
All right, so I'm here with Stephan Livera. Stephan, I've found you described on the internet as an Austro-libertarian writer and podcaster. I've never actually seen the country and the ideology paired together.
I can explain if you like. Yeah.
Have you answered that question before? That was my first thing.
Well, yeah. So I mean, the reason is it just means someone who's influenced by the Austrian school of economics, right? So Austro-libertarian. It just because understand Austrian economics is a separate concept from libertarianism, but they are usually people who are
see them a
Austrian
lot together.
Are also libertarians, but there are libertarians who are not into Austrian economics, to be clear. So that's kind of
just distinguishing these things.
Sort of just so people sort of get a sense of where are you coming from, how are you thinking about the world, different schools of thought that influence us, right? So kind of many of us in the Bitcoin world, many of us are sort of tracing our, let's say, our lineage, intellectual lineage or whatever, people like Menger, Mises, Rothbard, people like that.
These names you start hearing whenever you start looking into these things.
Right, yeah. And of course, I mean, there are different aspects of that, right? Someone like a Hayek, who's also considered an Austrian, but he had other influences also. But anyway, I mean, it just kind of, to me, it's a school of thought or a way of thinking about the economy. And generally speaking, most of us are free market people who believe in the bottom up, money coming from the bottom up and not money from the state down, like this kind of chartalist view of money and of economics.
That definitely helps clarify some things because, like we discussed right before we started recording, you are Australian.
Yes.
So I'm reading like Austro-libertarian. And I'm like, wait, is that because he's Australian? Because I was like, that sounds like Austrian School of Economics. I was like, but he is from Australia. So I was like, I just wanted to set that record straight.
Common confusion. Australia and Austria. Don't get them confused.
It's literally the joke at the beginning of Dumb and Dumber. It's like what Jim Carrey says to the girl in the car
or whatever.
Yeah, he's like, Austria. He's like, what is he? He goes, good day, mate. Yeah, that's what he says to the Austrian girl at the very beginning. That's like the opening joke of that movie.
Right.
I've heard from people that you're good with like doing something more technical, like getting in the technical side of things, or doing like the explain like I'm 5 version of things. Do you have like a preference as to like one or the other? Do you enjoy more than one or the other?
To me, it's I'm trying to think about the audience, right? Like if I'm delivering if I'm delivering a speech where the audience is targeted more to, let's say, investors. Then obviously I'm going to keep it very basic, very simple. I'm not going to dive into the technical details of like, the lightning channel this and rebalancing your liquidity no, like it's very basic. But then also there are times where I will be interviewing people on my podcast and they are very deeply technical people and maybe some of the listeners, maybe not all of the listeners of my podcast, they really appreciate a certain level of depth because they've heard the kind of the headline sort of things, and they want real in-depth kind of give me the nitty-gritty, give me the real like how does this channel thing or how does the DLC thing work and how is that going to work for the user and what does that mean for the service provider and kind of more of a technical industry conversation. So for me, it's, I guess to answer your question, it's understanding who is the audience and then tailoring your message, and that's for all of us. Like we should all do that. We should all tailor our message for our audience. Of course, it matters, if it's a podcast, then you sort of have to think who are the typical listeners of that podcast, or if you're at a conference, who's going to be in the audience there? Are they sort of investor types? Are they Bitcoin miners? Are they developers? Are they just kind of everyday hodlers, plebs, whatever? So it's really just tailoring the message for the audience. But I guess to answer your question, I guess naturally I get drawn to some of these technical topics, so then I can sort of end up going in those rabbit holes. But I sort of have to remind myself, hold on, think about your audience, who needs a simple answer versus who, or maybe who needs like an analogy that's not exactly correct, but it's like enough to give them a concept versus who wants like the real nitty gritty, actually technical reality on the ground of the network.
Is there a certain like theme or idea or message that you're going for? And also, I have too many questions that I've been wanting to have answered. I've been thinking about these for so long. You are more on the podcasting side than the writing side, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's like the heavier thing for you.
Yeah.
So what is like, is there like a certain theme that you're going for, like something that you want to get out into the world through it?
Sure. I mean, well, I am a libertarian. I believe in, let's say, free markets, private property, these kinds of ideas. And that was what drew me to Bitcoin in the first place, right? Like ending central banking, or at least stopping the state having control of money, was definitely a very strong motivator, at least for me. So I'm sort of, that's the perspective I'm coming from. But at the same time, we have to understand the world as it is today and understand the technology that exists today, because we also can't be so idealistic that we sort of get carried away with kind of, cypherpunk sort of pipe dreams of like what exactly is not going to be feasible versus what is actually going to be a realistic vision of how people can protect their private property and obviously their money, their savings, and also, transact, using Bitcoin and so on.
Yeah, it's all relevant to a question I've been asking people lately. It's a conversation I've been having a lot lately, but there's kind of this, I've noticed in the space, there's this need for all the 101 information, all the foundational information, all the basics. Because when I first got here, I asked we'll have another episode where I asked the other guests the same question. So I'm interested in your answer. But I know that when I came into Trezor, it's like I wanted to just jump into all the advanced stuff, because I was like, that's kind of the stuff I felt like was missing from the space. I was like, oh, we have all the 101, we have all the foundational stuff that's there. Let's jump into some of the more advanced things. And I quickly realized, well, that's not often what's needed in the space. Like, there are constantly new people coming in. There are constantly people who haven't heard of certain concepts before. And I was like, okay, so there's a reason that these like foundational concepts are spoken about so much. How do you balance these things? Like, because I know that you have technical people on your show. It's like, how do you balance this like need for the 101 stuff and this desire to go into the more technical things?
Yeah, it's a constant balance. It's a constant, I'm often wrestling with that same question myself of, how deeply technical do I go? Or exactly how many times should I stop the guest and be like, hey, stop. Can we just quickly explain this concept before we go further? Because otherwise we're going to lose people, Yeah. So there's a balance of that. But I think over time you sort of find a groove. You find, people find content that relates or resonates for them. And so, like, for example, for me, there might be a lot of other people who are into Austrian economics and libertarianism who like me and my show because I'm coming from that perspective. But hey, other people will be coming from a different perspective, so be it. But on the question of, technical depth, I try to I think here's the guiding idea. Now I'm not successful, but I try to make it accessible to the intelligent layman. That's kind of, that in my mind, that's what I'm going for. That's who I'm gunning for in terms of, if I'm talking to somebody who is maybe very technical in Bitcoin and they're kind of going into technical concepts, I'll try to hold them back and be like, hey, hold on. We need to make it accessible for an intelligent person who's just not kind of deep in the weeds on this.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back for them. And to your point about 101 content versus like deep, deep cuts and technical stuff, I think this is the eternal September of this space, right? Because there's always new people coming in. And of course, number go up pulls people in.
Yeah.
People can be upset about that, but number go up is fundamentally what pulls people in. We can hate it, we can shake our fists at the clouds and the skies, but that's what pulls people in. And so when there's a whole bunch of new people in, that's when they actually start paying attention, right? So it's not that they might have heard of Bitcoin, but or they might have, maybe even dabbled, had a small amount, but once they start to actually have a serious amount of their net worth in Bitcoin, that's when it's like, okay, now I need to actually learn some of this stuff. Then that's now you have an opportunity. And that's where now there's, different forms of content, whether it's long form podcast, shorts, written articles, books, whatever. Like, you just have to find a way that resonates with them and find a way that you can reach them, because not everybody is going to go and read code. Not everybody can read code. Not everyone will read code.
Yeah.
And there's a market and there's a space for people who can clarify and explain things in an accessible way. And that's why podcasts are so popular, right? Because, when I started my podcast in 2018, there really wasn't a lot in town, right? I was one of the few games in town in terms of Bitcoin only explainer podcast material. It was like me, it was Noted Podcast with Michael and Pierre Rashad, and TFTC with Marty and Matt, right? That was basically it in terms of Bitcoin only at the time. Now, 2025, I mean, there's a plethora of material out there, and that's good. I'm positive on that. I want more people to do. People should do more Bitcoin podcasts and content and material. So I'm supportive. It's a good thing because people resonate different ways. Sometimes it's like different languages, different regions, and sometimes they'll resonate more with that. So be it.
Yeah, I've seen, or actually, I kind of have like a running theory. So we're talking about these 4-year cycles. Like everyone, and once you get into the Bitcoin space, you realize like you're getting these giant new waves of people every single time.
Yeah.
After 2017, there was a huge influx of newbies. Same thing happened in 2021.
Yeah.
We're probably going to see the same thing happening now. I've had this theory that's like at any given time, you've probably got about 80% of the people who are buzzing who are in like year one, who have like just come in, because people tend to fall off. If you stick around in Bitcoin, there's a small amount that continue interacting. A lot of people tend to go quiet, but they're still around. They're still there, like somewhere, which is a lot of where that comes from. And it's relevant. So I have a quote from you actually that I found, which just said, we might be moving away from the notion of 4-year cycles in Bitcoin. First of all, what are your general thoughts about that? Like if you can expand on that just a little bit.
Yeah.
But also, do you think that weakens the argument at all for saving or investing in Bitcoin? Those two things.
Short version of the answer is no, it doesn't weaken the case, but I'll explain what I'm thinking there. So when I said that, what I'm getting at there is in the early years of Bitcoin, a lot more of the supply was, being mined into existence, right? As we speak today, I think it's like 94% of the coins have been mined in 2025. So my point with that is historically, the halving mattered a lot more in terms of cutting the new supply, right? So, in the first few years, or when the first halving happened and the second halving happened, it was a lot more meaningful in terms of cutting the amount of new supply coming into the system. Nowadays, because we've already, 94% of the coins have already been mined, there's not that much left. And so therefore, I don't think it matters as much. So people often talk about like, oh, but there's this many new coins per day, and these are the natural sellers. And okay, yeah, that's probably true. But don't forget now, we've got this effect of OG hodlers, and they may be selling, and that might be more influential in terms of the supply-demand dynamics than the halving itself. So that's my point, is that I think, it may not really be around the halving cycles. So we may still have cycle. I'm not making a super cycle argument there. I'm more just saying we could have kind of like who knows, it might be like a 5-year or a 6-year cycle. And then, or the other way people think about it is, sort of everything is macro, like it depends what the Fed is doing or what the US government is doing. Is the US government printing and spending a lot of money? Well then, hey, number go up, just like during the COVID lockdown times, right? Yeah. There was all this money printing and stimmy checks and stimulus. And then boom, number go up, right? And so I think it's just going to decouple a little, where arguably historically it was kind of coupled with the 4-year halving cycles in Bitcoin, whereas now it may not be like that. It may just be more about kind of broader macro. So I see it like, we're growing on this path, and we may still do these bull and bear cycles on the way. None of us knows, right? It might be from here until hyperbitcoinization. I mean, it could be 20 years, could be 30 years. None of us knows. But that's I'm thinking of it on a multi-decade timescale. Like when I first came into Bitcoin, when I was a noob in 2013, like late 2012, early 2013, I thought, like it's going to happen in a year or two, like quick. And, I was shouting from the rooftops. I was trying to get people in. And of course, I was not successful with a lot of people. I got some people in, but, I thought it would all happen so quickly, right? Whereas now in 2025, I'm sort of understanding, no, actually it's going to take time. It's just going to take time. We all wish, maybe we can wish that hyper-Bitcoinization would come sooner, like this sort of quick event. But no, I think it's just going to be more like this longer term process of people accepting and building up their own conviction in Bitcoin. Because it's one thing to kind of go crazy about Bitcoin in the bull cycle. Who is going to be stacking with conviction during the bear cycle? That's what really counts, right?
I love that conversation because I've seen it many times. A lot of my early days were just like spent on Reddit. That's how I really got into it. So that's where like my, I guess, education around it started. And obviously you have to be like careful with Reddit because it's like a crazy place. Like you get all kinds of information there. But that's like where it began for me. And you bringing up like the macro events, like affecting cycles. I found lately that I've just been having less and less faith with those kinds of narratives because like, I remember the first one I ever came across was Chinese New Year. That was like 2017, 18, I think, somewhere around that time. Might have been a little bit later. And then it was like institutional investors. And it was like stimulus checks. You mentioned that one. Like there was always something that people thought, oh, this is going to trigger the bull run or whatever it is. And then when things do happen, there's like something to assign it to. There's an event somewhere to be like, oh, well, it happened then. And it's like, well, yeah, but we had 4 other things we thought were going to do it. But now there just happens to be a big event or we can like blame it on that thing. But of course you can't like completely neutralize the argument either. It's like, yeah, I'm sure there's some like level of influence.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I'm with you. I think it's somewhat of a backwards rationalization in a way. Like I'll give you an example. In 2013 cycle, the narrative, not necessarily what was really going on, but the narrative was, oh, Cyprus is doing a bail-in. The banks in Cyprus were doing a bail-in. So large, if you had a large amount of fiat, they were going to take your money. You were going to get bailed in. And so so the narrative was, oh, this is going to pump the price of Bitcoin. Now, I don't know how much of that was actually driving. It might have been more like, just rich people in the US were buying Bitcoin. Who knows, right? Or Wences Casares was maybe he, the famous patient zero of Bitcoin in San Francisco. Maybe him and all his, high net worth tech bro mates were, buying Bitcoin. Maybe that was driving that $0 to $2, or not, sort of $12 to $260 run, and then it crashed again, and then later that year it went to like $1,200, and that was like the Mt. Gox failure collapse situation, and kind of Silk Road stuff was sort of also kind of happening at that time, and there's just a lot. But I mean, to answer you, or at least to contribute to what you're saying, different things happen, and then we try to attribute, and it's a question of how much should we attribute? Oh, was it Cyprus bail-in, or was it just people learning about Bitcoin and hype cycles?
Yeah, and similar with halving. It's like we talk about, and again, on the 4-year cycles, it's like that seems to have been the correlate for such a long time. It's like it seems like about 2 years after the halving, we would see like another big bull run.
Right, historically, that's what we've seen.
Yeah. That pattern seems like quite clear, but then there's like. Yeah, okay, so we're saying, we're seeing a lower and lower reward block. For anyone who is listening, it began in the beginning with like 50 Bitcoin, then it gets cut in half every 4 years, 25, 12.5, 6.25, and I think now we're on 3.125. Yeah. But the impact of those 3 is like so much greater than it would have been with like 25 Bitcoin, because we're seeing 300,000.
Right, because the price is higher.
Yeah, the price is there's so much more value to it. So it's like that's kind of where I've always gotten it's gotten a little like fuzzy for me, where I'm like, okay, well, how do we know the ratio of like the number of Bitcoin that's coming in versus the value of what's being injected into the economy every single time?
But the normal way people do that is they look at, okay, what is the block worth in fiat terms? So they would say, okay, so what we're talking about here
that's
is
where it becomes a hot topic.
Subsidy, and they would say, what is the block subsidy in fiat terms? And then people would just sort of look at that and be like, okay, that has been growing over time, because obviously the price has been going up faster than basically Bitcoin has been more than doubling every 4 years in simple terms, right? Yeah. And then that plus transaction fees make up the block reward, right? And so that's a factor. But there's all these other things going on too, right? Like as an example, I would say in the 21 cycle, that was when a lot of the miners started really doing the capital play, right? They started getting cheap capital. They were, that was kind of like miners were a levered play on Bitcoin in the 21 cycle, right? That was kind of how it worked. Whereas now, a lot of that energy now has gone to like the Bitcoin treasury companies, because that's like the hot new thing, the super hot thing that everyone's talking about, and they're getting these crazy return numbers, and that's, I think it just kind of, my point here is more like there are other environmental or regulatory factors going on here, right? Like the treasury company thing arguably was enabled by some of the changes in the government regulation, at least in the US side, right? Things like the SEC being more permissive. It's now the Trump era, not the Biden era. Like some of those factors have changed and sort of made this kind of accelerated this phenomenon.
Yeah, with treasuries, I was wondering, like, there's so many different opinions on it right now. And people are talking about strategy in a very similar way as well, because that seems to be kind of it almost feels like controversial the way people talk about it. They're like, oh, this guy is holding all the Bitcoin. He never has any intent of selling any of it. And there's people making like for and against arguments for that, as well as like treasuries holding huge amounts as well. What do you think that could cause any damage to anything? Do you think that's a good or bad thing, or how do you feel about them in general?
Yeah, I mean, first I will disclose I am an advisor and an investor in an upcoming treasury company, so I'll just put that out there so people know. Now that's not public yet, but in about a month or so it'll come out. But yeah, obviously I'm bullish on this category. I believe it will effectively function kind of like, if we think about the marketing funnel, this is kind of like a new top layer of that funnel, right? ETFs and Bitcoin treasury companies are like the new top of that funnel. And people are going to, now of course, our objective is to draw them further down the funnel so they learn about, self-custody and running a Bitcoin node and all of these things that we talk about as kind of maxi Bitcoiners. But fundamentally, I think the reason I'm bullish on these things is they are attracting capital in captive pools. So for example, in the UK, like a quick example, in the UK, there are some retirement accounts, I think it's called SIPs in the UK, they can't access Bitcoin normally. So that's why so many of them are like kind of running to these treasury codes as an example. And so there's a few different reasons, but fundamentally I'm bullish on them because as we speak today, Bitcoin is $2 trillion-ish. This is the Jesse Myers thing, right? So the Croesus BTC, he's got the chart that every sailor refers to it often. And basically, Bitcoin is $2 trillion. It's this tiny chunk of the world's financial assets. And then you've got this huge $300 trillion debt market and $300 trillion equity market. And we're trying to sort of tap that capital and bring it into Bitcoin. Now, I understand. Now, I would say on the objection side, I think there's probably two main camps that I can think of. One is the cypherpunk objection of the, hey, not your keys, not your coins. That's against the ethos per se. And maybe they would say, look, we understand Bitcoin is the money of enemies. We can't, so we can't stop you, but you also as a community shouldn't support them kind of thing. That's maybe that would be their argument. The other big camp, I would say, would be the religious objection. So let's say, if you're Islamic and you have an objection from a riba perspective because you see it like, hey, they're using fiat debt to accumulate more Bitcoin. Now, for me personally, I see it like we're stuck in this fiat system, right? Like none of us today can truly fully live on Bitcoin, right? Like if you got to pay your rent in fiat or, and these things. So I see it like the world is stuck in this fiat standard. And I see it like this is going to accelerate and bring forward the process of going to a Bitcoin standard. It might be still a few decades out. It's going to take time. We have to be patient. But I view it as it's helping that process and it's helping sort of new people get some exposure to Bitcoin. And then once they've had a taste of that, then they will learn about, okay, it's time to learn about Bitcoin and actually do that rabbit hole journey. So I see it as I'm supportive of it, but I will, the way I will explain it and talk about it is, look, first and foremost, self-custody Bitcoin. And then if you want higher leverage or higher risk, higher return, but also higher risk, that's where treasury companies can play a role for people, or it's that captive. So I think it's a few things, right? It's the captive pools of capital that cannot access it otherwise because of fund mandates or legal aspects or compliance hurdles that they otherwise would face. It's people who want higher returns and higher leverage, but they can't access it themselves. So as an example, think about you and I. You and I as individuals, we can't access that kind of cheap capital that these public companies can. So for that reason, being able to be a shareholder of some of these treasury companies that can do leverage and do, conservatively or intelligent leverage, they can access this capital and then you can benefit from that as a shareholder. But to me, it still comes back to you should see it as Bitcoin in your hardware wallet or your multi-sig, that's the safest thing. And that should be first and foremost. But I understand there'll be people who come in through this new sort of ETFs and treasury companies aspect of it. We can't, we just have to understand that's how a lot of new people will come in. So I guess there's also the whole I guess circling back a little bit to your question around what is the risk here? What could go wrong? So let's explore that a little bit. So I think people should be aware that they are leverage on Bitcoin. And so if we go into a bear cycle, and none of us knows if or when that happens, or when, I think. I'm not a super cycle guy. I think we will have, bear markets. But I think the risk could be a few things, right? It could be the people who bought a stock at a very high MNAV price, like at a very high premium. There could be an MNAV compression. And at that point, if Bitcoin is also going through a bear cycle, people could be down like really big numbers, more than big Bitcoin drawdowns in the past, right? Bitcoin drawdowns in the past have been, pretty crazy too.
90%.
Yeah, like 86%, 83%, I don't know, 75%, like these kinds of numbers, like if we're talking peak to trough. On some of these Bitcoin treasury companies, it could be even more, So I think it's
the high risk part of this whole thing.
Exactly. So I think you've got to be aware, and I think you have to sort of understand that this is not as safe as just buying Bitcoin in self-custody. So I think people should just understand that. And so it can provide access, though, where people could not otherwise access it. But you need to be aware there could be big drawdowns here. It could be, imagine if something is like a 10x MNAV and it drops down to 1 or below 1, and the price of Bitcoin also drops, let's say 60%, something like that, the person who is invested in that could be down, like 95% or some crazy number. So you've got to be wary of that. The other risk, more of a longer term risk, could be state capture or state government seizure or theft of those coins, right? We could see that kind of like a gold standard sort of thing. Hey, little pleb, you're not allowed to hold gold anymore. Give it up. It's for the good of our nation. You should be a good little citizen. Don't worry, little pleb citizen. Here's some little fiat. Here you go. Take some fiat, and I'll take that gold. Thank you very much. Now, could that happen? Maybe not now, but 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, with some of these governments that are in a lot of debt, they may say, hey, treasury company, you are legislated and regulated under our jurisdiction. Give us the coins. We'll pay you out some fiat. That could happen. So that's why for me, I always want to emphasize self-custody is number one. But, for a smaller part of your portfolio, let's say, if you believe that, you think you believe in that strategy of that company, you believe they have competent management, they know how to execute the strategy, can they outperform Bitcoin? Yes, I believe it can do so, just like strategy has outperformed Bitcoin. With additional risk. That's the important caveat, right? So people should understand it's not the same thing as just self-custodying Bitcoin.
You need to know what you're getting yourself into, basically.
Exactly. So that's how I see the risks. And I also think, look, some of this is just, it's late stage fiat as well. I appreciate that. Like, I think what we saw in past hyperinflations was a lot of people trying to take fiat leverage. Because remember, like, you've got to take a step back and understand, where are we right now? We are in a world where, if you look at the work of Matthew Mazinskis from Porkopolis, he does these quarterly base money updates, right? And I think the recent number he put out was 12.7%. That is the number of base money expansion. Meaning, if you are not earning 12% more every year in your salary, you're losing pace. Right? And think about it like this. So a lot of people have this incentive to, if they can access cheap debt, to, if they can borrow at even 10%, and get Bitcoin growing at 40 or 50% per year on average. Now, to be clear, there'll be years where it draws down, but on average, if it's doing sort of 40% and maybe tapering down a little bit to sort of 30% over the next decade or something like that, in that range, then there'll be a lot of people who will take that trade all day. As long as they're conservative with their leverage, it can make sense. Of course, not financial advice. People can get wrecked if they're not cautious with that. And what I would also caution is that in the heat of the bull run, people will feel like, oh, it's a safe trade. I can't lose. Just go all in. And it's often the people, and that's just like people have bought the top in Bitcoin cycles before. People have bought the $20,000 top in 2017, or they bought in the 60,000s in 2021, and then they had to kind of ride it all the way down to the FTX dump.
It's a big ride.
And then in practice, what do many people do? They buy high and sell low, because our natural psychology does that.
Yeah.
So that's why I think for most people, the safe thing is to stay humble and stack sats. But I think of these treasury companies as sort of, you can take a small play on them that can outperform Bitcoin, but with additional risk.
Yeah, I try to warn people who haven't been through one of these cycles before and don't understand or haven't experienced the electricity in the air, like for weeks. It will happen.
And you need to be countercyclical, right? Because that is the time, paradoxically, that is the time everyone feels, because that's what's the saying? Everyone's a genius in a bull market. Or everyone feels like a genius. I'm a genius, and so look, I've been there many times. In Bitcoin, you feel it's like you're talking to, family and friends, and they make you feel like an idiot.
What should I do?
And they make you feel like an idiot for 3 years, and then for 1 year you're a genius, and then for another 3 years you're a retard, you're an idiot. What are you doing with this Bitcoin thing? It's gone. It's never coming back. Like, these are the things people said in past cycles. Now I think it's kind of, most people sort of understand, Bitcoin is not going away. So it's going to come back, but it's a similar kind of thing where it is psychologically, emotionally challenging, because the media and the kind of the normies and the no-coiners will be sort of hitting you with this kind of, you're an idiot, you're wrong about Bitcoin, you think it's like special, no it's not. Whereas we believe, no, Bitcoin is special. This time is different with Bitcoin, truly. But there are just cycles. You got to ride these cycles.
Yeah, that's these are all, you're basically describing everything I've experienced since I got into it in the very beginning. Like, it's obviously very familiar, and it's really interesting to see these recurring narratives, messages, and kind of conversations that you have with people. And you've already touched on it a lot in some of your answer, but the next question was adjacent to some of what you were talking about. But the specific question was about ETFs, but it can really apply to many of the things you were talking about. And you do seem actually more lenient than a lot of, I think, people in the crypto space. But when there are things like this, like ETFs, or another classic example is exchanges, there's a lot of people in the crypto space that are like, hey, we don't want people using these things. Like, you need to be doing self-custody all the time. And a counter argument I've been bringing to the table lately is like, I mean, of course we feel that way. Like, we're in the industry and we're much more hardcore than your average person is. But the thing I've been bringing up with people is like, it's adoption. I mean, like, more people are coming in. It's the exact sort of thing you were saying. It's like, I feel like we need to stop being so strict. And you see a lot of elitism in the community of like, oh, you have to come into it this very specific way. And I'm like, we need to chill out on the average person, on someone who's just dabbling in this thing. Because if we come in with a hammer of like, punishing someone when they're interested in the first place, it's like, who cares? The majority of people, like, you probably started, that's what I'll say to most people is like, you also started on an exchange. You didn't go straight to a hardware wallet, like on day one. Like, almost no one does that, but it can be easy to forget like where you came from when you knew nothing as well. When you came in, especially if like, I mean, you've been in the game for ages. Like, a lot of people have been in it for years at this point. I mean, I've only been a Trezor for 1.5 years, but I've been on Bitcoin for 8 now. So a lot of times I'm trying to make sure I ease myself in, so I'm not like crushing people in conversations. I don't want to bulldoze someone,
Yeah. I love this topic. I think it's interesting because, purity kind of signaling online, it's almost like nobody can pass all the purity. Nobody can pass all the purity tests, right? Because to be a true, you got to be no KYC. You got to have multi-sig, otherwise you're an idiot. You got to, you got to do coin join. You got to do, you got to, use a cast iron pan and sell all your chairs and And some of these are kind of, they're fun jokes and memes, and I enjoy them too. But nobody actually passes all those purity tests because in reality, and we can't be hypocrites, right? Because there are people who, many of us came in, let's say, through a custodial exchange or whatever, because that was our first experience, or maybe in those days there weren't hardware wallets, like it was pre-Trezor or pre-hardware wallets existing. So, we have to be understanding, but at the same time, sort of guiding people towards the more secure pathways. So that's where I'm at. But I mean, I would, if somebody is, let's say, criticizing self-custody or criticizing, the self-sovereign aspects of it, then that's too far. Like, I think you should encourage people to self-custody where possible. So that's how I'm seeing it. And of course, there are different arguments here around, okay, well, maybe the UX needs to be better. And maybe that's where like things like maybe improvements on Lightning or Arc or whatever other forms of onboarding, where maybe people can onboard straight into self-custody. That maybe that's the future as well. And I know, of course, like many of the hardware wallets and even phone app wallets are trying to now build in things where you can like buy Bitcoin straight into your self-custody. So that's coming, and people are doing that too. So that's obviously that's great. It's good if people can just buy right into self-custody from day one. But the practical realities of the matter are that not everybody will. And so even coming to your question around ETFs and stuff like this, again, it's a similar thing. Captive pools of capital, they can't access Bitcoin on-chain directly themselves. So they're just, they're buying this, ticker, IBIT or whatever FBTC or whatever these ETF tickers are. And there are maybe other institutional reasons for that, or other personal or tax reasons for that too, because some of them may say, look, I can get cheaper borrow if they can, they might buy this ETF and then they want to do margin against it and they can get cheaper rates on that. And so it's hard to tell people, you have to sort of help them understand the risks of that too, right? And traditionally, as is tradition in this space, we've seen so many blow-ups, whether it's Mt. Gox or Quadriga CX or the kind of FTX Celsius BlockFi sort of stuff. And then every time one of those blow-ups happens, that's when there's a surge of interest in self-custody, because then people are like, oh, okay, now I understand why those maxis were telling me, hey, not your keys, not your coins, So it's a balance. It's a sort of a balance of accepting people how they come in and then trying to sort of guide them to understand, okay, you've got to use your hardware wallet and your multi-sig and all these techniques that we use to secure our coins, at least the majority of our stuff. And if you're doing like playing around, that's only a small portion of stuff that you're doing, whether, I don't know, ETFs, treasury company, leverage stuff, only that's a small portion of it. And then most of it is in your hardware wallet or that kind of thing. Or at least that's how I'm thinking about it. Of course, everyone's situation is different. There might be kind of tax considerations or jurisdiction considerations or life cycle, like if you're earlier in your life cycle, you might be more higher risk versus as you get older, then sort of you're more conservative about it, things like this. But broadly speaking, I want to help onboard people into Bitcoin. And here's another thing I want to touch on. A lot of people love to attack NGU, but that's what draws people in. And not only that, those, newcoiners, the normie people who are just buying ETFs and treasury companies, they are contributing to number go up. They are making the cypherpunks richer too. And so those cypherpunks and the people who are coming more from that self-sovereign angle, they are now wealthier and they can now fund different projects to sort of help, advance Bitcoin's decentralization or advance other, let's say, freedom technologies and things like this. So, they are winning. And I think Bitcoin itself remains a decentralized ecosystem. Yes, it would be nice maybe on the mining side to, get a little bit more further decentralization on the block template side. And maybe there's, people have criticized, let's say, the FPPS pool model, things like this. But on the whole, Bitcoin is decentralized. It is decentralizing further, and NGU factors are enriching the cypherpunks who can, if that's what they care about and that's what they want, they can go use that money, use that funds or that new appreciation in their purchasing power to go and fund and, create different projects that are actually increasing freedom. So for me, we're winning, and we should just, we should just, accept people how they come in and try to do our best to teach them about, the kind of non-custodial or self-custodial virtues and running your own Bitcoin node and these aspects of it. But we're winning.
Yeah. It's good to hear that perspective, because sometimes I feel like I'm crazy where I'm like, guys, we just need to like recognize net positives. Like ultimately it is a good thing for the industry, like moving forward. Maybe it's not like our most ideal vision, like on paper, but like, hey, things are moving forward. Like that is a good thing. I think probably my least favorite thing about the crypto space sometimes is when I feel like people have that kind of condescending nature. So like, I have a big secret and you don't. Like, I get that air from people a lot, and it's like that is going to push people away if that is the type of community that we are. And so it's like part of my goal is to be like one of more just like inclusion and acceptance for like, if you're interested in Bitcoin, awesome. Like, we can start from anywhere, and the conversation starts there. It's not like my agenda to push on you. It's like, if you're showing natural interest, like that is to me an awesome thing that I want to see expand as much as possible. And yeah, and you talked about like the UX thing at one point. Like, there's a reason that some of these major entry points are popular. Like, some of the big exchanges are sharp and smooth and easy. Like, you might have a terrible fee every time you move money, and like eventually, like, I'll want to get you away from that. But it's very easy to just sign up and click the button and have Bitcoin on your account. And to you, like, yeah, not your keys, not your coins. We get that, but at that point, if you're like throwing that onto someone's head when they're already trying to understand things that are new and complicated, it's just like all you're doing is kind of harming, I think, that learning process. But if they can see, I click the button, the number goes in, and then that sparks the interest, I'm happy with that. That's my personal take on it. Like, if you're moving towards it, great. We can get to the other stuff later, and that's fine.
I think sparking the interest is the key thing, because how many times have we, and I'm sure you and I and many of us have, when we try to teach our friends and family, hey, here's a hardware device, write down your 12 or 24 words, keep that safe, and like really be serious about it. But oftentimes what happens is they don't take it serious. Right.
Yeah,
so then
that's
later,
a hard one to communicate.
Right? And many of us, I'm sure many listeners can relate. We all have this same story because they kind of come back to you being like, "Hey man, I lost the words where and the device, I don't know." And then you're like, "Damn, dude, I'm sorry."
It's always in the middle of that conversation. They're like, okay, I'll keep it safe. And I'm like, no, really? Like, seriously?
Like, actually take it serious.
It is so important.
This is really, really important.
Yeah.
Like, the same way you don't want to lose your passport. Like that. Yeah. Really? Like, keep it safe.
It's genuinely
like
on that level. I mean, depending on
how
how much you're holding, it's like, like that is the level of like intensity of it. That like, how do you communicate that? What is your technique or your approach?
Well, I mean, I will literally use those words. I'll say, look, the same way you would keep your passport safe, keep these 12 words safe. Do not show anybody. Don't take a picture. Don't tell anybody the words, even if they claim to be from support or whatever. These are the common scams that are happening, right? Phishing scams and so on. So, that is it. And so, different devices, and of course, over time, things like backups and redundancy, things like, now it depends on the technique and the way you do it, right? Whether it's like multi-sig with different locations and keeping output descriptor backups. I know in the Trezor context, you guys are into the Shamir secret sharing as the backup. So, I mean, there's all these different approaches. I know even like the whole mini-script thing, like the Liana guys and the Keeper guys, they're doing these kinds of setups where maybe it starts out as like a 2 of 3, but after a year, it comes back to like a 1 of 3, or there are ways to sort of more easily recover those coins. With some different trade-offs around it. And of course, we need the devices to support that. So it's still sort of early days for that. But I view that as like a future of where things are going, self-custody wise. So then that will allow better flexibility for things like inheritance use cases, or maybe even business use cases where, you can set up these multi-sigs that after a year come back to single key control, something like this. And so, and also the other factor I've heard they're doing now is this kind of long-term emergency last resort recovery. So like 10 years later, one of the companies would be able to, some other third-party custodian company who's like a professional custodian can recover those coins. And so then that might allow people to feel more comfortable using self-custody, because that's a big barrier for a lot of, as I'm sure you've probably seen, a lot of high net worth people. They have they have a very serious concern about inheritance. They're worried about what's going to happen to the coins after they die or get incapacitated or something happens to them. And so that's why some of them are going to custodial platforms, because they view it, they perceive it like, hey, on this custodial platform, it's going to have a better chance of handing it down to my son or my daughter or whatever. And so if that can get alleviated in the self-custody world, that would be a huge step forward also. And I think this mini-script pathway is probably I think that's a good direction. And I believe in sort of the next kind of 5 years or so, that will become more popular.
Yeah, those are the types of challenges that I've been, thinking about ever since I started here. Because once you become a part of it, it's like you realize how much more there is to go, how much more there is to improve. The UX thing we were just talking about is a perfect example, because it's like, it's almost like if you're complaining about that, it's almost like a confession, because it's like if your platform was that easy or looked that sexy to someone, that would make it like super easy to get into. I mean, that's why like Apple products are so popular. Like they look sleek and shiny, and people like that feeling of everything. But yeah, to your point about people choosing one direction or another, going to something that's custodial or not, it's like, yeah, people who are trying to decide to do with what their future and passing on to their families are basically just assessing risk. And if they don't have an avenue to feel comfortable with that risk moving forward in a self-custody space, to me, that's like, I feel like that's on us. Like, we need to make that thing as easy as possible for other people. If other people don't feel like they can understand how it works, or they feel like the risk is too high, I feel like we have not provided the space to do that. So I often will hear people complaining that, well, people aren't using it this way. And I'm like, well, it's on us to make it usable. It's on us to make it accessible. It's on us to make it easy. Like, that's part of why I love this job and being in the industry, because I feel like we're helping build those things now. We're seeing these developments, new standards come up. A lot of what you just mentioned, I'm not even familiar with. I didn't know that some of those developments were happening.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can explain if you need to, if you want to dig into those or whatever.
It seems to make, enough sense based on how you were describing it. But like, I just love that is something we get to be a part of and get to help develop. But it's also like a moment to be kind of reflective on who we are as an industry, on who we are as influencers, like whatever your position or whatever your role is in moving this technology forward. It doesn't happen. It's not like it's not a giant leap. It's just like steps. It's little steps of improvements at a time. We've seen these things happen over the past, since its inception, over the past 15, 16 years. We have seen massive improvements to protocols and code and standards and everything. And it's just like, those things need to keep going. We're not there yet, in my opinion. It's like, we want to get this to the point. If people are like, oh, the hyperbitcoinization and globalization, all this stuff, and it's like, we are not at that point yet. I'm sorry. Like, we are not to the point where like my grandma can just pull out her phone and easily self-custody Bitcoin. Like, until we're at that point, it's like, we're going to have to do something that works for every user, which is another question I wanted to ask you about. Like, with so many people cheering and chanting for Bitcoinization and globalization everywhere, it's like, what does the industry have to look like in order for that to be accessible to people? Because like, I don't think we are at that point. I think it's pretty clear that we're not.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I think it's maybe 20 to 30 years out. Like, I think that's more realistically what it's going to take. You know, now some of us might like it to happen sooner. Hey, a bunch of us are, highly allocated to Bitcoin. We'd love it to happen sooner, but I think it's not realistic. I think it's more like 20 years out. It's probably 20 to 30 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Again, none of us knows for sure. I'm just guessing, right? But if you're looking at things like power trend or power curve adoption and things like that. But I mean, in terms of your question, what does it take? So I think easy self-custody, easy inheritance planning, easy things like a nice contact list experience in our apps. So, I want to pay Sean, and here's Sean's self-custodial Lightning address, or self-custodial Bolt 12 or BIP 353, human readable name. So again, bit more technical stuff, but the short version of it is it could be like a human readable name that resolves to your Lightning wallet.
Yeah.
And it could be done, in the ideal case, self-custodial, and even while our phones are offline. Now that's kind of the dream scenario.
Yeah.
We're not, it's going to take some
at
time.
least a few things that need to happen.
Yeah, because it's much easier to do that in a custodial way than in a self-custodial way without having to run a server. So that's where some of these other techniques come into it. And we're seeing, as an example, Phoenix Wallet. I mean, they are some of the goats in terms of Lightning wallets. So they have BIP 353 and some Bolt 12 adoption. And what that means is you can have your phone, you set up this app on your phone, it's got Lightning, and you can take Lightning payments even when your kind of phone is, well, it'll wake up your phone to kind of take the payment, but it's really slick because it's self-custodial. Now also Misty Breeze, which is by the Breeze company, they're doing like Lightning SDKs and things like this to make it easy to put Lightning into other wallets. So they have also implemented this BIP 353 idea. But this contact list idea is super slick because then I'm sure you've seen this, and many listeners have probably seen this. When you make a payment, you're like, hey man, do you want this on chain or Lightning?
Yep.
Can you send me the address?
Yeah.
Oh, you sent me the Lightning invoice. Oh, and it expired. Or oh no, you didn't put the amount in the invoice, and my Lightning wallet can't read that. And we'd have this kind of invoice dance.
Mm-hmm.
Bolt 12 and BIP 353, and some of these things can obviate all of that, and then we can have very easy contact lists. So I can be like, pay Sean 10,000 sats or whatever. And so that's one aspect of it. And then having kind of, that might be the spending wallet UX that we need to kind of have that kind of earning and spending in a very easy way. But then of course, for our cold storage, for our life savings, that's where the hardware wallets, multi-sig, mini-script, and some of these techniques, I think, will be more prominent. But it's what is there at the protocol level, and then it needs hardware and apps that make it easy, right? Because this mini-script stuff is there at the protocol level. But what the stage we're in now is maybe hardware wallets are supporting it, and they then it sort of needs to become more commonplace in the apps we use. And so I think this is all happening over time.
Yeah.
But it just takes time. And so those are probably the two kind of, I guess, worlds of it. But then of course you can think about things like, okay, what about at the merchant level? And that's where software, BTC Pay Server, and other payment processing software or services can help on the merchant side of things. And of course on the, people will need things like exchanges just to kind of go back and forth between, fiat and Bitcoin. Of course, it would be great if we could do everything denominated in Bitcoin today, but that's just not where we are today. So I think having all of those with an improved experience, improved security, that is what's really going to move the needle to getting more people being able to actually do this thing.
Mm-hmm. I do think it is a good argument for, getting into it today and in the future, because it feels like so often people harp on a more like negative kind of looking backwards, like, oh, I missed the wave. You can't get into it now. It's too late. Like you had to be one of the early adopters. And I'm like, that's where I'm pushing up my glass. I'm actually, there's quite a bit to be done. There's quite a lot of development in the future, and it's still a very exciting space to be in. Like we're not like, of course, there's plenty of historical things that have happened that are really exciting and really cool. Would have been cool to have been a part of if you missed it. But it's like, there's just so much more to be done. And I feel like a much more optimistic view than I often hear from people when they're like, oh, it's too late. I'm like, absolutely not. There's so much more to be done. But I guess sometimes it can be easier to take that pessimistic route on things.
I mean, it's like, I think Saylor had an interesting slide or set of slides on this on his talk at BTC Prague. He was saying, are you too late to use Fire? Are you too late to use the internet? Are you too late to... It's like, no.
Yeah.
These are just, Bitcoin is a technology. It is, I think of it as a monetary technology, and we're not too late to use it. You just use the monetary technology. Like it's a massive improvement, in terms, especially when you're talking about international payments, right? Think about how much of a pain it is to do fiat bank wires, right? Oh, what's the address of this person? What's their full name? What's the source of the funds? What's the reason for the payment? Da, 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 da. Whereas in Bitcoin, it's more like, hey, copy paste the address, or Bolt 12, hey, contact list, done. Scan it, pay it, it's done.
Those are questions that I didn't even ask prior to Bitcoin. I remember the first time I took a trip here to Prague, city we're in, for anybody listening. And I pulled, because people will say my card's just easier to use, like fiat's just easier to, or they'll say cash just easier to use. I mean, the first time I moved here, it was 2015, so it was 10 years ago. And I remember going to the ATM machine, putting in my card, and it was just blocked. It was like, my money is frozen. And they're like, oh, well, we've locked it down because we saw a transaction from across the ocean. And it was a nightmare trying to get that thing undone. And then even after that, massive fees, huge fees. Every single time I needed to do anything, anytime I would withdraw huge fat stacks of cash, because it was it was a flat fee instead of a percentage. So I would do as much as I could so that I wouldn't have to pay it again. Yeah. And it's those are things that I just accepted about the world. Like, that's just how the world functioned. And I didn't question that. I was like, that's just the way things are. It's, sucks to suck. That's how it is. And now there is an actual answer and an actual solution because people talk about it in large ideas. I'm like, no, that is just a daily, like, I was a normal person doing a normal person money thing. And that affected my life. And I know it affects anyone in similar situations. Yeah. So it's like, these types of arguments are things that I'm glad are becoming like more like prevalent and more like understood in the public space.
Something I want to add on that actually is nowadays, kind of first world modern thing. What most people are doing is they're tapping their phone or they're even smartwatches or whatever. I mean, I don't have a smartwatch, but they're tapping their phones and things like this and cards. So they expect that. That's nowadays kind of the expect, or in, let's say, in Asia, in China and stuff like that, they've got whatever WePay and Alipay and these kind of, it's all apps and scanning and QRs. So in Bitcoin land, I think what's going to happen eventually is Google and Apple are going to have to open up their ecosystem a little bit to let Bitcoin wallets use that. And so eventually we're going to have like our Lightning wallet on our phone that we can just tap, and I think probably an interesting example is, I think, was it Epic Games recently sued Apple about this whole Apple tax thing? I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, I did see that.
It was like 30%.
They were like the underdogs on that whole lawsuit. Yeah.
So eventually, look, Google and Apple are going to have to open up their ecosystems to let us use our phones to tap and pay Bitcoin and Lightning. So I think that's another direction we're going as well. So people will expect kind of parity with that. They want to be able to just tap. And I think, in Bitcoin land, we have things like the Bolt card. People are building in like NFC into Lightning wallets and things like that. So it's a similar kind of thing. Like this kind of payment, just tap to pay, is going to come into Bitcoin as well. It's maybe not the most prevalent form of Bitcoin payment today, but it'll come, I think. So that's another angle that we're gonna see.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna make a quick Prague plug here because we actually, I don't know if you've seen
Quirko.
it. Quirko. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, we have probably the closest thing to that I've seen is in this city, and it's just like a QR code that they've partnered with restaurants all over the city, and at the end of your meal, you can just scan that QR code and pay with Lightning and be on your way.
Yeah,
so
I mean, it's amazing.
Seeing that in real life is like, it's just so cool to see actual implementation.
I was kind of blown away, even chatting to some, Czech people I know, like actually Joseph Tedek, even from Trezor. He was telling me that, so many people here, it's like a normal thing for people to have Bitcoin, right? They have and use Bitcoin. And I think another Czech person I was talking to was saying that it's just become even part of the politics here. And that was what apparently got this capital gains thing in here, right? This new law where I think it's if you hold Bitcoin for 3 years, capital gains free, which is amazing. I mean, that's so good, right? So because obviously it's just so good for the ecosystem that now you can freely earn and spend Bitcoin and not have to think about capital gains, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, seeing those types of advancements is really encouraging, and that's the sort of thing where people, again, like you'll hear arguments of like, well, it's not really moving, and like you'll hear the same like criticisms over and over. And to me, it's like if you compare today to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it's like night and day, the difference in the amount of advancement there has been into normalizing the technology of today. Things like Quirko, things moving, even the fact that politicians and banks are even talking about it. It used to be like beneath them. They'd be like, oh, that's not even, we don't even talk about that here. It wouldn't be a part of the discussion. It is now because it's had this inevitable climb, slowly but surely, but that's hard to sense when you're like in it on the day to day. It's hard to feel those changes. But if you zoom out and you take a look at timescales of like years instead of just days or weeks, it's like, it's pretty obvious that there have been advances, that things are going in a good direction. Yeah,
to me, this is like just zoom out, right? It's a common Bitcoiner saying. People get so caught up in these little news items, and I think some of that is when people are new, they have been trained by financial news and financial media that, oh, XYZ event happened and this happened to the stock market or this happened to the price of Bitcoin. So they've been trained in that way. Whereas in Bitcoin, once you've been here for a while, you sort of just learn to kind of zoom out a bit and not worry so much about kind of, even if Bitcoin is down a couple $1,000 today, whatever, who cares? Like, just think about the long run. Like, if it's doing 40% a year or whatever, who cares? So just zoom out. Like, and I think that's really a lesson that you learn as you've been in. And of course, it's one thing to tell someone zoom out, but they need to have felt it, and they
Yeah.
need to have gone through a bear cycle themselves to sort
Yeah.
of understand, okay, that's why those maxis were telling me, just zoom out,
It's kind of like a learn the hard way sort of lesson. Like going through it is, I think, is what teaches you the best of the whole thing. Pretty much everyone has a story like that, I think, because like everybody goes through it at some point. It's so hard to regulate your emotions when you're hitting some of these big peaks and troughs that we've talked about. I mean, my favorite meme, my favorite Bitcoin, this is like, I don't know if this is outdated at this point, but it's the two guys on the roller coaster with sunglasses on, and they're being like thrown around, but they're standing still with like no expressions. It's like, this is what it's like to, if you've done it before, like this is how you respond now. Because it is, honestly, it feels that way. Like you will feel the swelling, like the hype and everything around you. And now, I feel like this guy who's just, I don't want to be like a downer to people, but I just want to be like, be careful. Like, don't go too crazy, your first time through. But it's impossible. If you don't know, if you haven't done it, it's so hard to get a grip on all these feelings and all these thoughts that you're having about everything. And you hear the crazy stories about like people mortgaging their houses and like stuff like this at the peak. It's like that kind of stuff does happen. And, you just got to, I would just say like tread carefully your first time through. And then maybe make stronger commitments after you're like a little bit more familiar with stuff,
Yeah, like I think it's easy to say, oh, I'm staunch, I've got a high risk tolerance. Like it's easy to say that.
Yeah.
But wait until you're tested with an 80% drawdown, Okay, maybe it won't be 80%. Who knows? It might be only 60%, who knows? But just sort of go through a bear market cycle, just sort of wait till you've been through a bear market cycle. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you shouldn't sort of work to, stack Bitcoin, work hard, stack sats, but just, be ready that a drawdown could come. And especially, it's especially likely to come when there's a retail kind of FOMO mania. So you have to sort of learn to act counter-cyclical in a way. When everyone is kind of crazy about Bitcoin and it feels like it's the safest thing to take leverage and go long and all this stuff, that's when you've got to actually be careful.
That's your signal.
And the time when everyone is like, oh, Bitcoin is dead, it's never coming back, it's the FTX bottom or this recent tariff bottom at like 75K or whatever, that was paradoxically the best time. Or the COVID crash from like 10K to 3K or 4K, that was the time to actually properly, load up and, back up the truck, as people say.
Yeah. I've got one last question for you. It was one other tweet that I saw of yours. It was Bitcoin, not bonds, Bitcoin, not houses, Bitcoin, not gold, Bitcoin, not stocks. So a couple of these, like I've heard pretty obvious arguments for in Bitcoin, like bonds and stocks, I think are a bit easier because we know how sideways those can go. And we're talking about risk tolerance and everything. Houses and gold, however, I would say if you're talking to someone or someone who's not a Bitcoiner, someone who's not into it, those are like the staples in retaining your wealth. It's like those two. And then I added land on there. I didn't know if you have an opinion on this one. These are like the three things that I think pretty much everybody grows up hearing are like the unshakable stores of value is the way that they're kind of spoken about. Do you have any arguments for why Bitcoin is better or why these things might be more risky?
So on the case of gold, I think it's just, gold is old, right? It's just, it's not going to be the money of the future, right? We're not going to think about the future we're going into where people are going to be doing like AI and machines transacting and, people being able to transact freely. Gold just doesn't work that way. You just cannot transfer gold that easily. Whereas with Bitcoin and the Lightning Network and other L2s, things like ARK and things, you can transact it very quickly and programmatically. Like it's just so day and night clear to me that gold is not the future of money. Now, sure, will it go up in fiat terms? Yeah, sure. But I think it'll go down in Bitcoin terms. Now, property is a different category. Now, what I would say with property is think of it more like consumption, right? So, okay, if we're thinking about property as an investment, what people should do is look at the charts and the sometimes there are infographics people put out of what is the price of that house priced in Bitcoin.
I've seen those,
and you'll see it's like it's down. It's down, and it's really brutal. So if people have been investing in property thinking they'll make money out of that, they've got another thing coming. And it used to be that housing was better understood as a consumption or a lifestyle thing. It's not that people buy houses because number go up. That's a more recent fiat phenomenon that people weren't able to save in fiat. So then, and the government, and so they would be kind of treating their housing like a savings account. And that's what happens in many parts of the world. In Australia, Hong Kong, Canada, America, like just different parts of the world, it's become a savings account. And so what I would tell people is go and look up examples. And I think there's like a famous picture, I think it's in Detroit actually. So it shows kind of this block of houses and then 5 years on and 10 years on after they've been abandoned.
Yeah.
And you know what happens? It goes back to nature. Without constant maintenance and work, these houses are breaking down. And they looked fine. It's not like they were totally terrible houses. It's just that there's this kind of entropy, this kind of breaking down factor, and that you need to be constantly putting in maintenance. And so once people are no longer living there, guess what happens? It goes back to nature. And so the point I want to make here is think of housing more like consumption. It's not something that you invest in because number go up, because it's not going to go up in Bitcoin terms. And so it's more like if you're going to own housing, it's like for the self-sovereign reasons or maybe you want to raise your family there, or you want to, operate your business there, or kind of have something that's in the family. But understand, it's maintenance. You need to be paying to continually keep it up, to keep it the upkeep on that.
That is true. Yeah.
And so really, it's just been kind of fiat leverage that's driven these properties to the moon, like to the sky high prices. And the governments and institutions around society have encouraged that. And it's because now there's a very large constituency of property owners. They do not want number go down. They want number go up. So they will vote accordingly. Yeah. And so in Australia, this is kind of a big debate now because people are talking about how there's not enough housing supply, and there's debates about how much they should have built. Of course, there's arguments about immigration, all these things, but there's something like 66% of the population is living in owner-occupied housing. Do you think that they will vote against their own interests when this represents a large percent of their life savings? No, obviously they will not kind of do that. And that's why I think Bitcoin is the new opportunity. That's also why Bitcoin is the new opportunity for people, because if people are, let's say, younger and they're complaining that, say, the boomers got to buy the property super cheap and I can't afford that now, it's out of my reach, you have the opportunity of Bitcoin, right? So stack Bitcoin now, because I think all of these other things, the main way they will survive is by attaching Bitcoin to them. Think about it. Bit bonds, right? Or Bitcoin treasury companies, or gold funds that also have some Bitcoin in there, or even property funds or property development firms that also have some reserves in Bitcoin. That's the way they're going to survive longer term, because otherwise they're all just going to do this in Bitcoin terms. So short answer, Bitcoin is how you actually store your wealth, but I understand housing as a consumption act or a consumption good. So just think of it more like that. And in that context, it's like, yeah, okay, if you are in the place in your life where you're like, okay, I can afford this and it's where I want to raise my family and I want certain freedom and flexibility. Whereas other people will be more like, for me personally, I'm renting. Like, I believe it's capital inefficient for me to own a home that's, going like this. I would rather just rent and the property owner is taking the depreciation, you know what I mean?
Instead of yourself.
Instead of me. So, but it's not a one size fits all. Of course, there may be situations where you need to own, because that's kind of, there's not really anywhere that you in that place, or your job is there and you need to own whatever, right? I'm not prescribing this is the one and only true way, but I'm just explaining how I think about it, that it's going down in Bitcoin terms. That's the simple answer. So basically that's why.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you coming out today and being able to answer some questions for us. We end every episode with what I call the awkward handshake. Okay. Because we have these microphones kind of in the way. You kind of just have to reach around.
All right, let's go.
Yeah.
All right.
I appreciate it.
No worries.
I just want to say thank you for coming on, because I was looking forward to hear your opinion on all these different questions. I love the answers that you had for us. So I guess we'll see you around. We'll be back for next year for BTC Prague.
If they'll have me, yeah, sure.
Maybe see you again. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming out. We'll see you around, okay?
Cool. Thank you. See ya.